Hello everybody and welcome to Shelve, Store, or Sell, presented by Crushing Comics. My name is Crisis with a K, and I am here to look at the comics not already on my shelves, but the ones that aren't. I have a huge amount of comics downstairs in the stacks. This is just one box 1110, which has some indie stuff in it. And it's just like the other boxes in that I probably haven't seen what's inside of it for at least 2 years, if not 5 or 6 years. And it is time to excavate. Do I want to keep it? Do I want to read it? Do I want to get it out of the house? Now's the time to find out. So I have not looked through this at all. It says indie author W through Z and title A through E. So if you watch the older videos on this channel of me doing my Unwrapping series from, I don't know, what was that? 2017, 2018. Those videos probably had some of these books behind me on the shelves, and I packed them up to come to this house, and then I haven't seen them since then. And at the time, I kind of just had all the indie stuff on the shelves because I had no coherent way to box them. But now some of these things, I don't know if I want to keep long term. So this should be really interesting to go through and decide if they're going to hit the shelves again. Let's start with, gosh, this book is large. Oh, okay, I know what it is just by the size of it. It is Morning Glories, Volume 1, the Compendium. Now, this is really interesting because it's this huge compendium size. It's by Image Comics, and it is a softcover rather than a hardcover. We tend to think of the books this big as a hardcover, and it's a standard size hardcover. So if I stack it up with my Excalibur here, it's just normal comic book size. This is Nick Spencer's indie series, and before he was the Marvel guy, the Secret Empire guy, the Spider-Man guy, he was a pretty noteworthy, pretty fun, rad indie author. And this series was kind of like Lost. It wasn't Lost. It was like the show Lost, but in a high school. And so it's kind of people described it as like Lost meets Harry Potter or Lost meets, I'm trying to think of like what other thing is. Here's what the back cover stuff says. Morning Glories has the sort of premise you might associate with an ambitious TV show. Spencer and Eisma have somehow caught lightning in a bottle. It doesn't help me to know what to compare it to. I read some of this. I probably read this through like here. And here's the thing. It's one of these series that just constantly unfurls new mysteries, much like Lost. And in doing that, it just kind of lost me over time, like, because I don't have faith that books that just unfurl stuff are ever going to solve the things, which is what's satisfying. And this got to the end of the book, and it just ends because they went on a hiatus. And that hiatus started a long time ago, and there's been no hint that more Morning Glories is going to come. This is the second printing from February 2015. So that means it ended even prior to that. And there's no indication that's coming back. We're 6 years later. And the other thing is that it was fun to read at the time because Spencer did a lot of stuff to support it. He had like a Tumblr or something. He would like have comments and back matter on every single issue. But now it just seems kind of antiquated. I still like Eisma's art. I like this really clear, kind of hyper-realistic art. It appeals to me. I'm an easy mark for it. But I'm never going to sit and read this whole thing because it's unfinished. Like, what's the point? So I think this is a sell. I don't even know if I would be able to sell it, honestly. I might donate it to local library. Like this, they have a really cool graphic novel program there. But yeah, I see no reason to keep this in my collection any longer at this point. Okay, what's next? Oh, okay. Well, I know a lot about this, and I'm happy to see it here. So this is Birthright. I'm trying to see if there's more of it. There is. It's not all in one stack. Birthright is a series by Joshua Williamson. It is with, is it Skybound? It is with Skybound, which is the imprint that is run by Walking Dead creator Kirkman. What is Kirkman's first name? Robert Kirkman. And what I've learned about this imprint over time that's kind of interesting is books for this imprint are not entirely creator owned, and sometimes the creators don't come up with the books all on their own. Sometimes Skybound is like, we really want a book that's XYZ. This book in particular is kind of like, we want a book that's kind of like Conan, but in the real world, sword and sorcery, real world crossover. And so they have somebody create that book, and clearly the creator has points on it and they can work on it, but it's a Skybound property, which is strange. But anyway, enough of the behind the scenes. I love this book. It's on its last couple issues now as I am recording this. It's been really fun to read from the first one. The artist on this and co-creator is Andre Bresson and colorist Adriano Lucas. They do amazing work. They do amazing fantasy spreads, but they also do great real world too. And this story has just been awesome. It starts out with this kid. He's thought to have been kidnapped or murdered or something. He's been gone for years. His little brother is now a teenager. His parents have since divorced. This is not a heavy spoiler. It's all in the first issue. And what if he came back? But what if instead of coming back as a kid, he came back as this fully grown adult warrior dude? And that is what this series is. And all of the ramifications of why would he come back now? Where has he been? What has he escaped? And why does that world want to cross over with our world? If you love that kind of low fantasy stuff that crosses over to our world, but then with a slice of high fantasy when it goes over to the full fantasy world, the fantastic world, it's awesome. I really couldn't recommend it any more highly. It's one of my favorite books. I already have some more of it on the shelves here of stuff that just come out since I've set up these shelves. And even though I've read the whole thing, not even all that long ago, this is the kind of book I would reread once every couple of years. It's weird because it doesn't get that much love, press. It's going to end at issue 50. It came out around the same time as Saga, and I think it has a lot of similar themes to Saga, but it's much more fantastical instead of being sci-fi, and I just love it to death. So I hope it eventually gets oversized hardcovers. I would buy those in a second, and if it does, then maybe I'll decide where those are going to go. Now, we're at the Williamson part of this box, and I do have some other Williamson in here. It's Nailbiter, volumes 1 through 5. Nailbiter was this, actually there should be a volume 6 too. Is that in here? Yes, volume 6. Nailbiter is a horror series about this town that generates serial killers. It's very famous for a lot of serial killers being from there. And there's a fresh murder, and it seems like maybe it's this one serial killer who was never fully caught or prosecuted that's still in the town, and it kind of just embroils the whole town. I've read through this, and I had a lot of initial affection for it. It didn't quite stick the landing, honestly, but it was okay because the rest of the book was so good. But here's the thing. They did a sequel in 2020, Nailbiter Returns. It was not great. I didn't think the story was good. It was rushed. I didn't love what it did with the characters. And they say they're going to come back yet again. And honestly, since I would not buy the physical collection of the one that came out in 2020. I mean, I read it, but I don't need more of it. So now that he's extending the universe, and that in the second go in the universe, it didn't even kind of bring this to a satisfying conclusion when I didn't even like the conclusion the first time, I don't see me rereading it, because the much like Morning Glories, it ended on an uncertain note, but because it was so good, I was willing to kind of stick with it. But now that we've crossed past the uncertain note and it turns out not to be great, I'm kind of like, who needs it? So I think that's actually a sell. It was good. I still like Joshua Williamson. I just don't really see me rereading it off the shelf again. So, shock ouster from my collection. There's only 3 more in this author alphabetical by Rob Williams. This is Unfollow. It's the complete series, issues 1 through, I want to say, 18. It is from Vertigo, and it's pretty recent from Vertigo. I think it came out like maybe 2016. I want to say I had the first volume before we moved to New Zealand. The first volume was in 2016. It's a really interesting series. You see the cover kind of has this motif, like we're looking at it on an iPad. It has like a little photo and a little dot about this multi-billionaire millionaire who has tons of money. He's going to die, and so he just assembles all of these people, 140 people, because that used to be the character limit on Twitter, kids, 140 characters. And whoever can survive some fixed amount of time, not just on an island, just out in life of these people, will get to split his money. Except for there's a lot of other things happening. There's people from inside of the operation who want to take advantage of the money. There's some people who are world famous who get picked for these 140. There's some people who are just regular people who are having major troubles in their lives. And this follows how it resolves. I will say one of the strongest things about this book is Mike Dowling's art is just awesome. It's really super detailed and it lurid without being gross. I don't know how to say it. It almost has that Frank quality where it's super, super detailed, almost to the point that people have too many lines on them. But I really enjoy it. I like these kinds of stories that blend reality TV with like social media and add some fictional elements to it. I think towards the end, it got a little unfocused. It felt like maybe he originally wanted it to run like another 2 to 6 issues, and he just didn't. So it was like, let's get the plots done. But I really did enjoy it. I really could see me rereading it. Does it need to go on a shelf though? I don't know. I mean, I could read it, but I've read it so recently, and I've read it recently enough that it's in my sheet with all my notes that I don't know if it's like let's pull it off the shelf right now and reread it, given all the other things on the shelf. So I think that's a store. It's fine. I like it, but I'm not like in a rush to like have it on display and reread it. So that was it by the alphabetical authors, meaning authors I had enough stuff by that I wanted them alpha. But now I just have alpha by title. So these are indie books where maybe I only had 1 or 2 by that author, and I thought it'd be easier to find them by title. The first one is Afar. Afar is by Leila Del Duca and Kit Seaton. I have never read it. It says, the Nameless City meets Star Wars in this epic young adult fantasy adventure with the spirit and spunk of Delilah Dirk and the Turkish Lieutenant. That sounds really cool. I really tend to like Leila Del Duca's art. I think I know her from Shudder, I want to say, with Joe Keating. And if it's YA, it might be something I can read with the kids. So I think this is going to come back out on the shelf until I read it. And then if I don't dig it, it will go back away again. Was this an OGM? I want to say it was an original graphic novel and not a collection of individual issues. Yeah, I think this was just a graphic novel from 2017, which would explain why I haven't read it, because 2017, 2018 is like when I was making the jump from reading everything collected to starting to read digital singles to try to like order less physical stuff now that I'm in New Zealand. So this was probably like the tail end of me ordering stuff that I wouldn't have read in digital already. So that's going to go on the shelf in the hopes that I will read it. Next up is Harlan Ellison's Seven Against Chaos. I don't know anything about this. It's DC, but it's not Vertigo, I don't think, which is so weird for like DC to release a creator-owned thing and not have it not be during Vertigo. Really cool art. Paul Chadwick, well, you can't go wrong. Paul Chadwick, the creator of Concrete, I want to say. So I don't know anything about this. In a far-flung future, humanity has colonized the solar system, conquered its genetics, and mastered its destiny. Decadent societies sprawl across... I'm doing a horrible job of reading this. Decadent societies sprawl across the known worlds, built on the backs of slaves, powerful robots, and extraordinary reordered humans, designed for war, labor, and pleasure alike. So it sounds really cool, but here's the thing. This is from, like, I want to say 2014, original graphic novel. And I still have not read it. I think I just saw this cover in 2013. I saw this cover, and this was pretty early in my collecting, and I was like, Harlan Ellison's a cool author. This sounds like a neat concept. I like this kind of sci-fi stuff. Let's go for it. And then I never read it. I'm going to put it on my shelf one more time in the hopes that I'm finally going to read it, and hopefully it's a timeless classic and deserves its spot on my shelf. But if not, it goes. So I think that's going to be the case with a lot of stuff in this box. It's like stuff I've always meant to read, so hopefully putting on the shelf will get me to read it. And then if I don't, then it's finally time to kick it out. This is Atlas Origins. I'm almost certain I got it from Kickstarter. This is not a page that's fallen out. It's like an extra little piece of information. So I think I Kickstarted this. Although I think it maybe was individual issues and then he collected it. But I've never read it. It's by Dave Schwartz, lettered by Ed Brazon. Hey, how about that? So yeah, pretty cool stuff to have kickstarted. I love to kickstart comic stuff that just looks like it's going to be strong without knowing a lot about it. It's got really pretty strong art for a Kickstarter book. And I'd really like to finally read it, honestly. It says it collects all Atlas Origins issues, all 6, and all 6 Atlas training journal entries, whenever they are about. So I will check that out and see if it's worth having on my shelf. Next up, this is a classic. Now, it's got such a nice soft touch cover too. I love these soft touch finishes. This 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank. It is by good old Matt Rosenberg, who's a Marvel writer now, although he still does indie stuff too. And who is the artist who's amazing? Tyler Boss, who's the art, and then color flatting by Claire Dezutti. I think you could teach how to make comics with this comic. It is so relentlessly structured, so perfectly paced. It's kind of like got a Goonies quality because it's a bunch of kids, but it's a little bit of a heist story. It's got a coming of age things to it. It's really, really good. And even though I have softened a bit on Matt Rosenberg over the years, this is one that I actually read in digital floppies, and I was like, I need this book in my collection. It is an all-time great. So I think it was one of my top comics of the year it came out, but I think its release was straddled across 2 years, so it kind of like missed my list because there was like 2 issues one year and 2 issues the other year. Also, it's out from Black Mask, who didn't have a really great track record with getting things out on time and on a regular schedule. And so that really harmed a lot of the really great books that were coming out from Black Mask, and they have not been releasing a whole lot since then. Feels like Vault kind of stole their thunder. But this is a great book. I could see me rereading it any day of the week. It absolutely is a shelf book. It was bought explicitly to be a shelf book. Next up here, we have Alex and Ada. It's by Jonathan Luna with Sarah Vaughn. You can't see that because it's all white. I've read this already. It was fine. But it turns out I don't really love the Luna brothers. I liked it at the time. Sarah Vaughn wrote the script and the story. Luna does a script share and script assist and all of the illustrations. It's about like a guy who's like a little lonely. And so I think his like grandmother buys him this cyborg, doll / partner, that potential, house slave sex robot. And so they start to form a relationship, and there's all this stuff about AI rights. Luna has this particularly kind of stiff art that is kind of appealing. I mean, I know you already heard me say I liked it in things like Morning Glories, but I don't super love it here. And I feel like now that I've read this once, it's kind of like, yeah, I heard it. Like, there's nothing about this that is so significant that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to go back to this all the time. Plus, I really thought it was going to be a gateway into liking Luna Brothers stuff, even though it's only the one Luna on this. And it turned out that I was kind of like, on Luna stuff. And so I think that's a sell. I don't see me rushing into this room and getting this. I think they finally did an oversized hardcover of this. And if I really loved it, I would get it, but I don't. So I won't. Okay. Got Loving That Cell Pile Growing. This is The Beauty by, I want to say his name is Jeremy Hahn, and co-writing with Jason Hurley. And I think there's a different artist on each of these volumes. This volume 1 has art by Jeremy Hahn, who's co-writing. And this volume 2 has art by somebody different, I can tell. But here's the thing. So I remember reading this volume 1. This was at a point that I was buying a lot of image stuff. Wow, this has all different artists. Mike Huddleston, Brett Weidel, Stephen Green, and John Rush doing colors. And I remember at the time I read this. It was kind of raunchy. There's like some sex aspects to it. I just happened to open to a page that I cannot show you because I don't want to get demonetized. And but the thing about it was the first book was really gripping, but then it ended in a way that really annoyed me. And I was like, where are you going to go from that? I don't know. And then I kept pulling it because I wanted to see what happened, but I never read it anymore. Like I never read the second one. And I think I was pulling digital at some point and I never caught up on it. So it kind of feels like I have these first 2 volumes, but I also have it in digital. Even if I love it in digital, like, am I going to like suddenly get the rest of them from my shelf? I don't see that happening. I think they had their shot. Maybe I'll page through the second volume, but life has moved on at this point. I think I can sell these. I don't really think they need to stay in my collection anymore. Clearly, I'm not going to keep collecting that series. All right, next up we have, this is something really cool. It's A Distant Soil. Unfortunately, it's just 1 volume of it. So this is Colleen Duran's magnum opus, but what's really also, it has a die-cut cover, which you don't see very often in collections. The thing is, though, this was supposedly going to be the line where she like goes through and kind of remastered it the way that she wanted it to, with the art looking how she wanted it to. She was a singular creator on this. She scripted it. She drew it. I think she maybe even lettered it. And I was really excited for this because I was like, wow, this is finally, they recreated her lettering as a font. And Richard Starkings then went in and I think re-lettered it using her lettering with a font. I'd always wanted to read this. It was one of those things as a fan in the 90s, you would like read in Wizard Mag about Distant Soil and you'd be like, oh, that sounds so cool. But it was like super indie and it wasn't like the kind of thing your like regular down the street comic store necessarily was going to back issues of. And so I just never got to read it. And when this came out, I think came out in like 2012 or 2013. And it has the first 12 issues and I was so excited about it. And I thought, hey, maybe this will like collect everything. And it just, I think maybe they did another edition or maybe they just didn't. And so I never got the rest of it. So it's kind of a bummer because it would have been fun to have this shelf. And I wish for Colleen Duran's sake that it had been popular enough for that. I think I would keep it in storage. I think it's like fine to have, but I don't know that it's like, going to go on my shelf as only 1 volume. I think if they finally put out like a compendium or got the other volumes out, I would very happily have it on my shelf. I almost want to end now because this is going to kind of go long, but I just have a few more books I think we're going to power through. Okay. This is Victor LaValle's Destroyer. I love this comic book. This is from the point that I was reading all in digital starting in 2017 and 2018. This was published in February 2018, so it was a 2017 book. It was one of my top 10 books of 2017. It's a brilliant retake on the story of Frankenstein. Victor LaValle very shortly is going to be writing in the X-Men line. They have not revealed yet, as of the time I'm recording this, what he's going to be writing, but I love this. I would like to reread it as prep for him writing in the X-Men line, and I absolutely want it on my shelf. It's one of the very few collections of post-2017 books that I have purchased to have in my collection. I'm really mostly digital now. So for me to let an indie book into my collection in the past 4 or 5 years, it means the book was really good. Okay, speaking of things I've always wanted to read, I mean, we weren't speaking of that, but now I'm speaking about it because this is Black Dragon. It is a hardcover version of this indie comic by indie darling Chris Claremont with John Bolton, who, if you've watched our Epic X-Men rereads on this channel, John Bolton is the artist that does a lot of the Epic X-Men reread, and I think Claremont had already worked with him on this book, and he asked him to do the X-Men Classic comics, thinking like, oh, Bolton might not even want to. And Bolton said yes. So to me, to read a Chris Claremont indie comic that's about dragons and stuff, like that's the easiest possible sell. I have no idea what it's about. It's been in my collection forever. I'm putting it back on the shelf so that I will finally read it. Okay. Just a few more in here. Let's just grab them all so they don't keep tumbling. Okay. Let's see what we've got left. Speed round. I have 2 volumes of Doc Unknown here. And I also have, by that same person, a single issue of Boss Snake. I kickstarted this, although I think then it got released by an actual comic publisher, I want to say. I would really love to finally sit and read it and see what it's all about. I'm pretty slow on Kickstarter stuff. It's kind of like I either read it when it comes in the door or then I never read it. So I'm going to put that back on the shelf so that I finally read it and could have something to tell you about. Next, we have Earthward. This was another Kickstarter. It was created by Brian Q. Miller. Oh, he signed it. How cute. Must have pledged a lot of money. Art by Marcio Takara and colors by Rainer Petter. So this is, I bet my name's in here as a backer. So it's really produced really nicely. It's got a nice thick cover board. The pages are really nice glossy paper like Marvel could never. And I think there's my name. And I think that I read a little bit of it and I was like, hey, this is cool. I want to keep reading it. I think it was like on my bedside stand back when we lived in the States. And then I like had to pack it up. And then because it came out in 2012. So this was a pretty early Kickstarter adventure for me. And I just like never got it back out of the box and read it. So this is going to go back on the shelf so that I will read it. You will see I'm much more like lenient with the indie comics going on the shelf because like there's a reason they're in my collection. Like with Marvel comics, it was just like I wanted everything for reference, but that doesn't mean I'm necessarily like excited about reading every Marvel comic. Whereas these books, like they're here for a reason. Okay. Euthanauts. Much like Victor LaValle's Destroyer, Euthanauts is a very recent comic book. It's by Teenie Howard and Nick Robles, both of them superstars, that I specifically invited into my collection because I was obsessed with it. I read it so many times in digital. I read it again in physical. It was from the unfortunately short-lived Black Crown imprint of IDW. Most of their books were amazing. I want to say this was where Shelley Bond? Yeah, Shelley Bond, previously one of the editors at Vertigo, I want to say, headed after Vertigo got shuttered. I highly, highly, highly recommend this. You'll hear me talk about it a lot on our channel when we're talking about Teenie Howard and Excalibur. It's got a fantastic classic Sandman vibe. It explores the lines between life and death. It's very clever. It's the kind of book you want to reread multiple times to make sure you really caught everything. I incredibly highly endorse it. I wish there was more of it, honestly. This is another Kickstarter book. It's Everything Will Be Okay. It's by Matt Wilson, but not colorist Matt Wilson. There's another Matt Wilson that does comic books, Matthew D. Wilson, and art by Rodrigo Vargas. And I think, to be honest, I saw people talking about Matt Wilson having written something and kickstarted it, and I pledged for it thinking it was colorist Matt Wilson, and then I realized that it wasn't colorist Matt Wilson, and I was like, well, I think we're just going to stick with it. I mean, it has the backers in it, although he's made the interesting choice to not put them in alphabetical order. So maybe it's the order that they pledged. I don't know that I could find my name more quickly enough on this. So here's the thing with these Kickstarter books. Like, I wanted them in my collection for a reason at the time. I'm proud to have supported them. And I'm probably not going to be able to sell them. Like, unless somebody did a Kickstarter that turned out to be like super ultra famous and the Kickstarter was like now a rarefied thing, there's not going to be a market for it. And even if there was a market for it, would that market exist in New Zealand? Probably not. So might as well put it on the shelf. And then if I don't like it, might as well store it because where else is it going to go? This last one I have in my hand is Effigy by Tim Seeley, this was definitely in my range in like 2014, 2015, where I was like, if something looked cool, I just picked it up. Yeah, it's 2015. It was a Vertigo book, pretty late in the development of Vertigo. I read it actually. I actually sat down and read this cover to cover. It's like a murder mystery. This girl who became a famous actress, but then she goes back to her hometown. Now she's a cop. It's like clever enough, but it kind of just was like whatever. And I've just had it in my collection since then. I really don't see me rereading it. It's actually from when Shelley Bond was the editor of the original series for Vertigo. So, I mean, I'll attempt to sell it. I don't know if there's anybody to buy it. Maybe it's a donate to library, but it's just, I'm not going to reread it. I think I was going to say I was into Tim Seeley because I had read some of his DC stuff, but I had not really been reading DC until after Rebirth launched, and this was before Rebirth. So I think it was just a blind buy, honestly. I'm not familiar with anybody else on the team. It was okay, but, not exciting. So I actually have one final thing here, and it's Conan, which is not really indie, but I didn't know where else to put it. So this is one of Dark Horse's Conan Chronicles that previously were the only way that you could collect all of Marvel's Conan title. I was like really interested in reading some Conan, so I got this because I wanted to read some Conan, but I had heard that it had a lot of recoloring. And here's some of the recolors. Why don't we just start on the first page, because then I'm going to pull the epic off and show you the comparison. So here is The Coming of Conan, which is the first Conan story. And here's the first page. It's colored in a very modern way over older pencils, which is one of my biggest pet peeves in comic book life. So now, from behind me, is a Conan Epic Collection, which collects Conan issues 1 through 13. This doesn't even say what it collects. I think maybe just like 1 through 8, I want to say. Something like that. And so here's 1 through 13 collected. And even though the paper's not as nice, let's see how that opening page... Oh no, it's in a different order. Oh no, there's just like a prelude story here. Okay, hold on. Here we go. Just a totally different story. Totally different. Look at that lurid pink on her dress. Here, for some reason, they've made her dress green. Why? Why would you do that? I don't know. So, basically what happened is I got this book and I looked through it and I think I read a few stories and I was like, this is horrible. I'm so not interested in these colors, not the stories. I just hate modern recolors on old pencils. It never works for me. And it's not that it looks bad. Like, this page looks great. But I just want the original flat colors. So I did not continue to buy the series. I wound up making a Conan guide that chronicled how to get all of Conan before we ever knew that Conan would be going back to Marvel. But I decided I didn't need a shelf of it. And look, it turned out okay, because now I'm going to get it all as Epic Collection. So this is an easy sell because I'm going to have all that same material in my collection as Conan Epic Collections. So that is box 1110. And wow, that really went in an interesting direction because there's only 4 books that were a store. There is a pretty huge hunk of books that are potentially a sell or a donate. I can barely even lift them up with that huge Morning Glory book. God, that feels like 100 years ago that I was talking about that, not 10 minutes ago. And then half the box is going to be a shelf. For various reasons. Some books because I love them, like Euthanauts, like Birthright, like 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank. Some books because it's finally time to read them. So that's a really productive episode of Shelf Store or Sell. As a reminder, I have all sorts of stuff in the stacks, right? For every time that I come up with a Marvel book and a Marvel box of books, I'm going to come up with like an indie box of books of stuff you've maybe never even heard of before. That's the fun. There's 150 boxes and I've got to go through all of them and figure out what is in them. So until I do that once again next time, thank you so much for watching Shelf Store or Sell. And I'm your host, Crisis with a K. And until the next time I see you, I hope that you are well.